Welcome to Flexing Up Podcast, brought to you by Encore. My name's Craig Watson, and today we have an amazing guest, Jeff Nugent, co-founder of the Contingent Workforce Institute, managing editor of the Contingent Workforce Strategies. He's a global contingent workforce management strategist and independent contractor compliance expert, and has a brilliant Ask the Expert podcast series all the way from Waterloo, just outside of Toronto in Canada. Please welcome Jeff to the show. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Craig, for having me. It's amazing to have a conversation with you on both sides of the globe.
Technology is an amazing thing, isn't it, mate? Hey, before we kick off and talk really just get under the hood of the contingent workforce, why don't you tell us a little bit about your career that brought you to the space you're in now?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I'm a business person, first and foremost. That's what I was trained in and educated in. And I thought I was applying to be like working for an IBM or Accenture consulting house, and it turned into be an IT staffing company. So that right out of business school, I got into the staffing industry, and you just kind of bump into it, right? If you talk to people in our industry, no one wakes up and says, I want to be a recruiter, right? Or I want to be in the staffing industry, and you just kind of bump into it. So I bumped into it, found out I was pretty good at it, and really have never left, but my career's evolved. So from doing about 15 years in IT staffing, during that tenure, just huge things happened from the advent of the internet, right? Coming through, where you could actually, instead of having paper folders and resumes on fax machines, you could start to now search and use the internet to find people. And so during that tenure, there's just such crazy innovations in technology, and then evolution in our space too. So I got, for that staffing company, built the first MSP and VMS solution called FlexTrack that's starting to really see some global traction now. But it was a massive opportunity within that organization to take market share and to protect its staffing business at the same time. And then I kind of went, why am I doing this for someone else? And had some backing of some of the banks that had seen some of the really good things that I had done at the former employer, and started a company called Contingent Workforce Solutions. So that also, getting the URL for that means I've been around for a long time, and secured that way back in as that terminology started to evolve. And we were a pure play employer of record with a thesis of, this thing called the internet is going to bring more of the people and the employers and the jobs together directly without the staffing community. And we would employ them and deal with all the complexity of, employment tax law. From there, though, merged with a company out of Philadelphia called People 2.0. And People 2.0, we decided to continue with that branding as we merged the two companies together. We went on to recapitalize and go on a buying spree, and we had mergers and acquisitions, about 14, 15 companies around the globe, including in Australia, Entity Solutions Group. And then we wrapped that all up nicely and sold it to a private equity company tail end of 2020, 2021. And then since that time, founded the Contingent Workforce Institute, and another company called Independently, which is an agnostic independent contractor vetting tool that can determine if a worker should be an IC or should be run as a temporary employee, and payroll remittances done on their behalf in an agnostic kind of pre-employment checking manner. So yeah, I've been kind of in this industry for a long time, and my career's evolved as the industry needed certain solutions. I thought it was feasible business, and went from there.
When you started back in the day, and you said that we were looking at the internet and how we could use it in a new way of work, how much pushback was there from traditional working models back then? Was it like people thought you were crazy? How did it sort of, when you were in pitch meetings to say, right, we've, setting up as an employer of record, and people hadn't heard of the concept or anything like that before. What was it like back in those pioneering days? I'm not saying that you're old or anything.
Yeah, pioneers. I got my pitchfork and I'm out on the farm. It was interesting because, luckily enough, my history was some innovation doing the MSP and the VMS solutions. And in that early days, and still today, our industry is about trust.
Yep.
Right? Because you're dealing with people's livelihoods, their jobs, how they get paid, how they feed their families. You're dealing with government remittances, etc. So it's highly regulated. So it's really important that there's trust. And so, earn that trust in developing some of the early solutions around vendor management solutions. And so, looking at this idea of EOR, we didn't even call it EOR back then, right? Or employer of record services. It's kind of only in the last 5-6 years that it's really stuck as a idea or a term. And yeah, like people saying, well, you're in staffing, but you're only doing the employment side of it. And like I say, the thesis was, people are going to find their own people in higher volumes because of technology. And, fast forward remote work, we've got things like LinkedIn, the job board evolution. More and more companies can find their own workers. But the idea of compliance with regulations, employment and tax laws, just streamlining the process of dealing with the contingent workforce, because it's not just hire them and put them on a salary that they get, the same income and the same payroll run every week. It's, hey, you got to put in your time, and the time varies each week or each month, whatever the frequency is. There's invoicing, there's accounts payable, accounts receivable involved. So it's very complex. And so having a third party take on and streamline that process, and then manage the complexities of regulations and being compliant with those regulations, really caught fire and continued to grow.
The whole concept or environment of contingent workforce is both confusing but evolving at the same time for a lot of businesses. So, I'm heavily involved with the talent acquisition industry across this region. And there's still not a lot of people within that industry that understands the contingent workforce that well. It's an invisible workforce. There's procurement and finance and HR are more involved in that than what they consider traditional recruitment. It's really, really difficult. So, businesses that are working into, not only that, we've got so many different models out there and seem to be adding, we've got VMS, MSP, we've got your CMO and employment of record, you've got hybrid models, you've got internal models. There's so much to go on, and so many people who are tasked with the responsibility internally in enterprises don't understand themselves. How do you, sort of in your work day, how do you sort of navigate that, Jeff?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I've, when it really picked up, it was in kind of that 2008, 2009 timeframe. And if you recall back, it was an economic downturn.
Yep.
The housing in the US was melting down, and the banking systems were falling apart, and there was recession. And so it really started to become popular there, where it was a cost savings initiative.
Sure.
And so when you think about it, paying people is a very significant line item on organizations' books. And this was an unmanaged kind of, between staffing agencies putting in contractors, to hiring them directly, to having potentially statement of work providers or ones running projects that they're billing. This was unmanaged, and it was usually at the operations level or a departmental level that they had budget. They just pay a consultant, and like you say, it was unmanaged. It was nobody really looked at it.
Mm.
Well, because of the economic downturn and the need for cost savings, people started to say, let's look at this. And I always say there's HR, there's procurement, but the real people that those two parties want to go to, and specifically when procurement took it over, they went and talked to information security.
Yep.
And they talked to the accounts payable department. And they said, hey, let's do some audits and forensics on profiles of your invoicing that are on these, accounts payable, target accounts. And lo and behold, consulting and contracting and these types of categories, all of a sudden we're seeing a lot of $10,000 a month invoices happening, but on scale. And so when they started to aggregate this and find who the vendors were, they found they were staffing vendors. They found they were consulting houses that were just body shopping often. And by aggregating it, it was a huge amount of spend on aggregate.
Mm.
And by managing it, you're not only streamlining the process, it was a cost savings initiative where you could go and say, well, wait a second, why is this person who has the same skill set doing the same type of work, and this person, why are the rates, this one's $125 an hour, this one's $75 an hour?
Yeah.
Well, $50 an hour difference times 2,000 hours in a year is $100,000 on one consultant rate.
Yeah,
so what ended up happening is rate cards starting to be implemented where you have your maximum rate by skill set, etc. And it drove massive cost savings for the organization. So, that's actually how this progressed. Fast forward, we're now going into demographic driven scenarios where that has become a large portion of the workforce, but also the demographics where we are in workforce shortage, skill shortages, even though we're in somewhat of a little bit of an economic downside. And the organizations are turning to HR and saying, if you can't find them full-time, we got to bring in external workers finally. Or the other side of it is the CEO goes to the head of HR and says, how many employees do we have?
Uh-huh.
And they go, it takes them 2 weeks to get the data first and foremost, to their HR systems for some reason. And they come back, well, we have 3,500 people. And the CEO goes, well, on that mine over there, I got 17,000 people. Your numbers are off a little bit. What is it? Well, they're external workers. And so HR is finally either being embarrassed to come to the table, or they're needing to come to the table saying, oh, shoot, we're not being able to hire people full time. So we got to look at it from a flexible workforce perspective. So it's interesting how the transition from spend to talent is happening now as we speak.
Yeah, it was sort of so, maybe the wrong term, but so unregulated within businesses where, like you said, we came out of 2008 and there was some hiring needs, but probably internally there wasn't approval for permanent headcounts or even part-time headcounts. So they looked in different buckets of cash to bring in statement of work people and then contractors in other areas. And it almost became hidden by default and almost on purpose by some parts of the business. Oh, we can bring this person in, statement of work. They won't know it's an extra body. And only now, or I shouldn't say now, but let's say recently in the last few years that companies are saying, hang on, let's track this hidden workforce. Where are they? Who are we paying? How are we paying them? Like you said, rate cards are different for here to here to here. And this mess is being sort of, it's pushing companies to come into businesses and help solve it, whether it be via technology or whether it be via a complete overlooking system where they can help out. And I think that probably leads us into the next question. How are you seeing in the contingent workforce space technology changing over the last few years and probably into the next couple of years to help solve those sort of problems?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, there's a convergence
Hmm.
in technology happening. The VMS has turned, I want to say 25, right?
Wow.
20,
All
even
grown up.
older, almost 30 years old. So if you
All
think
grown
of the
up.
VMS as technology, it's technology, but it's legacy technology.
Yep.
Like for the most part, a lot of them have been implemented for long periods of time, and they are the system of record. And when I say there's this convergence and there's also this like the trying to fight with newer technologies is disruption. So the new technologies that come with bags of investors' money are like, hey, we've made the new mousetrap. It's much better. And why aren't you buying it? Well, think of large, massive multinational organizations. If you went to the CFO tomorrow and said, hey, we got a flashy financial system, you think the CFO is going to say, yeah, no problem. Let's just switch out our financial system and our ERP. That's what's happening right now in the market. So if you think of when it was hot 2000s, in the 2000s, 2008, the VMS ramped up. It was
Yep.
amazing how quickly the adoption happened. And then integrations with financial systems, integrations with HR systems all happen, and it's part of the woodwork. And so the newer technologies coming in, i.e., the freelancer management systems that are coming in with tons of investor money behind it, are coming in saying, oh, we're going to disrupt this staffing ecosystem. And then they're complaining because they can't get in
Mm.
and they're saying, well, we do that and but we do it better. And
Yeah.
these tech bros are all like shaking their fist and their propeller and
Yeah.
they're crying. And so I go to them and say, well, wait a second. What do you actually do? Are you a VMS that does this to this to this? Or are you a system that provides a body to a job?
Hmm.
Because if you're a body, if you've got a talent pool of candidates and you're providing that pool of candidates to fill that job, that makes you a staffing agency.
Hmm.
If you like it or not, you can call yourself something else, and that's great. That's all marketing BS, but it is what it is. And you should fit into the ecosystem that's already existing and has existed for 30 or 40 years and integrate into the system record or the VMS.
Hmm.
And the ones that are getting it, like Upwork, I'm not sure if you've heard of Upwork
Yep.
in down under there, but Upwork is the global leader as a platform. And over the last year and a half, they've been announcing VMS partnerships
Right.
because they're starting to realize let's fit into the ecosystem because that's where our bread is buttered because we provide people better, faster than staffing agencies. Great, but fit into that ecosystem. So there is this, interesting evolution. And so when we look at the technology in staffing agencies that were very manual in their processes
Hmm.
are starting to implement technology that looks more like these FMSs, and FMSs, because they're missing their mark with the algorithms um, and not actually being able to place people
Yep.
faster, better than manual staffing, they're actually putting people behind the technology curtains. And so there's this interesting convergence where staffing agencies are starting to look like technology companies and technology companies are kind of looking more like staffing in their enterprise solutions models. So, the evolution of technology is 100% changed how business is done for efficiencies and automated a lot of the administrative tasks, manual administrative tasks. And they're getting better with the matching as well. So I think with the advent of AI and adoption of AI, it's just expediting everything within our industry, from writing job descriptions to matching candidates to doing the administrative tasks of onboarding and paying them as well. So
Yeah.
you're going to see rapid evolution of technology in the next few years.
It's interesting too because a lot of Gen Zers and different generations are coming into that contingent space, and we've seen for a number of years and continuing the trend of more people working within a contingent environment. And with younger generations coming through who grew up on devices and grew up on embracing technology, we can probably see that. And also, I guess, with the last 2 years of Gen AI being everywhere, that this will infiltrate really, really properly and across the contingent workforce.
Yeah, and on a global basis. So the pandemic accelerated the remote work knowledge worker model, and remote work then propagates a global talent pool and a global supply chain and a global client base. So today, if I'm an Australian staffing agency, I can place people in the US easy, because I can find workers now through technology and the internet. I now, through EOR services, can employ those workers in jurisdictions that I may not be able to pay them. So there's a lot of interesting solutions out there, but really the fundamental idea there is with remote work, there's a global talent pool, and with technology driving how we work, like this podcast, we're on both sides of the globe. We're able to do work that way too. And we've proven it, because the pandemic wasn't just a flash in the pan and we went back to traditional ways. It was elongated, that we hired people and hadn't met them for a year or two, right? Before we actually physically met these people. And so it's proved that you can have a remote workforce. And I think that's going to continue to be the way it is, because once again, I think we do have talent shortages. And it's going to continue because it's demographic. And I think the contingent workforce is going to continue to climb, because it's also demographic, where you've got our Gen X and the baby boom all retiring, but not wanting to stop work, but they want to work on their terms. So being a consultant and having flexible gigs from time to time versus full-time employment is the way they want to work. And then the generations behind all want to be CEO of a master of their domain right off the get-go after a year of experience. So they want to go out and consult. And quite honestly, they're less loyal to their employers and they want to get rich quick and that kind of thing. So they tend to lean towards consulting and flexible work too.
It's interesting. Hey, during the conversation today, Jeff, you've talked about a couple of big global incidents. We talked about GFC, and we've also talked about the pandemic. What about Trump 2.0? Do you think that there's going to be firstly a US-based change in the way that we work in the contingent space, and then more globally?
Yeah, no.
Okay,
I think
good
at the end of the day, it will continue on its path. Will Trump change anything? He may deregulate slightly, but quite honestly, he is not as Republican and pro-deregulate everything as everybody seems to believe. And so at the end, he's only got 4 years to do stuff, and and government moves slowly to change legislation, etc. So, there won't be a change, and we're just starting to deal with the 4 years of legislative changes that are coming through, that came through that pipe. And so in the US, there's a lot more regulation around independent contractor usage, the regulations on what is deemed an independent contractor versus what should be deemed an employee. And that will proliferate globally. And governments around the world are independent of what the US does, and they are changing the regulations as we speak, because it's about economics. The pandemic spending and what has gone on is a lot of deficits around the world. Our governments are in having financial issues. And what is their number one source of revenue? Employment taxes, income tax. And so the use of independent contractors where there is no payroll tax, and you're cutting a check to a person that may or may not remit that income tax to the government, where it used to be the employer would take the tax off for income tax and hand it to the government. So the regulations now are going to continue to come fast and furious as this trend towards contingent workers and independent contractors particularly is there. And so it's about taxes. You can talk about the independent contractor misclassification. Enforcement is about precarious work and, the workers, not getting their safety net and that's a percentage of it, no question. It's important to look after the workers and not deem someone that's in, a $15 an hour minimum wage customer service role an independent contractor so that they don't get unemployment insurance if they need it. Like, that is precarious and that needs to be enforced. There's no question. But why governments have been just ramping up their auditor workforce, it's about taxes and they're coming for you.
Yep. Interesting. I guess a little bit like me, you're lucky in that driving a podcast series, you get to talk to really smart people, right? And you get to absorb and learn all the time. So my next question is, given what you know yourself in your own research and speaking to experts on your podcast, what are you seeing as the major trends over the next couple of years that you believe that will come through via the contingent workforce?
So the need for flexibility in the workforce, both driven by the employer side, where we've just gone through a down cycle, and you won't see the hiring of people back as quickly as you would have through different cycles.
Right.
I think they're going to continue to keep a very lean bench and then have this flexible workforce come in and out when they win business, when they have peak periods, etc., and then letting them go. Once again, with regulations and additional taxes on payroll taxes, etc., it's getting more and more expensive to have full-time employees. I think that trend will continue where, it was in the early days when I started, it was 10-15% of the workforce was deemed contingent or contract workers. Now it's probably in the 30-35 range or greater, and they're predicting 50 or 60% in the next few years. So that's a major trend. We'll continue to have that flex workforce. I think the global talent pool is very important. Technology is democratizing work, where I can be in Africa, South America, some of these developing countries, and not have the opportunities that developed countries, people that were born in developed countries had, but with the advent of technology to educate workers, micro-credential workers in these developing countries, and then get them work in a U.S. multinational or a European company, etc. You're going to see a lot more of that, where the developing nations are going to be the talent pools of the future because they're becoming highly educated through the use of technology that's doing that. So I think that's a major trend to look out for. And that's not unlike using different geographic groups for better rates of workers in the past anyways, but it's really going to become more prevalent. And then you can't talk about the future work without talking about AI. And I would call it, there's the term that is being used by some that have written books and stuff like that. And basically that's your idea of a bot or a robot or AI doing work. And so I think that the time has come where it's actually becoming more real, and it's scary, but not really, because it's being used in the right ways, where it's taking on lower level tasks and amplifying people to do more work with less. And that's becoming part of the resource mix and the decision making around your resource mix. So the idea of total talent management, where you've got You've got your full-time employees, you've got your contract workers that are on an hourly basis and managed by the entity. Then you've got outsourced work, and now synthetic or AI-based labor. And then you wrap AI on top of it to make the decisions on what is the best cost, what is the best quality, what is the best availability of these resources to get work done. It's going to all just start to optimize, and everybody will be somewhat contingent. Even the full-time workers will be inventoried for their skill sets and competencies, and then brought into projects like they were contractors, even though they're engaged and employed in a more of a full-time manner. So it's going to be interesting there. And I mentioned that last thing in that kind of how the resource mix will be managed. But the idea of skills being inventoried,
Yep.
and things being put on a task basis where you can use a fractional person, a fraction of their time to get a piece of work done and then not need it anymore. And then they finish the jobs with other people and use fractions of their time. And technology and AI is being able to do the analysis so quickly that you can optimize that. So if you think of it as like work as building a house, you really only need the framers at this phase. You need the plumbers, electricians at this phase. You need the finishers, the window people at this phases. And those, if you think about it, those are all fractional people that you use on a fractional basis during a specific time in projects or work getting done. I see that happening more and more, and that's how we'll organize work getting done.
Really interesting, isn't it? And a lot of this relies on technology and AI, not only keeping up but providing solutions. So you talked before about yes, some roles or some tasks by AI will become redundant. It's more the repetitive admin tasks, and we saw with the advent of the internet, and even before that, fax and other things in life or in history, that we do have to change and we do have to move with evolution of the modern workforce. We're seeing over here in Australia I don't want to say a reliance, but a real desire for companies, particularly large ones, to have more visibility tech of their contingent workforce. So understanding exactly, and you touched on it before when you said that there was a CEO who said, "Oh, on that mine we've got 17,000, and yet you're saying we've only got X number." But being and having a real understanding of where the contingent workforce sits within their enterprise, and not only that, being able to, if they finish a project or a piece of work in one part of the business, knowing that and being able to then redirect them to another part of the business without losing the IP or without losing the person. And that's something that a lot of businesses really struggle with.
Yeah, big time, the redeployment of it. And so that actually is one of the, often an obstacle or something somebody cites as a challenge of bringing in contingent workers, because they're not as loyal to the organization as our full-time employees, and the loss of IP. So, I've been on a number of webinars and discussions around that where, that's all in the engagement model. You can help retain the IP if you set up, either through technology, the institutionalization of that knowledge, and like you say, the redeployment of workers into other gigs within the organization that retains the knowledge that you may need to get back to, because the worker has it over here. But if you've set up proper engagements, either, and often it's the two obstacles you hear is compliance and IP issues. And so, knowing that, it's just setting up solutions that can drive compliance as you're engaging workers to make sure you're not creating any liabilities in the way you employ them. And then on the back end, making sure you have ways to retain knowledge and institutionalize it. And then, I laugh when people say, well, the contract workforce and the contingent workforce is less loyal than employees. Give me a break. The stats are full-time employment. The average full-time employment is now shrunk to 2 years.
Yep.
And the contingent engagements with renewal, when you add renewals on contracts and engagements, is closing in on 18 months. So you're almost
Not that
seeing it
different. Yeah.
equal. So, you just need to now think of everybody as mobile, flexible workers, no matter how they're employed, and set up those proper systems to ensure things are compliant and make sure your IP is retained and institutionalized as your asset.
Yeah, fantastic. Hey, Jeff, it's been absolutely amazing spending some time with you today from over the other side of the world. We hope to see you in these parts very, very soon. And if not, I might have to jump on a plane and come visit you myself. But thank
Anytime.
you. Thanks for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. And I hope that everyone listening has got some gems out of this, because I know I have. And it's been fantastic. And thanks so much for joining us on the Flexing Up podcast today.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Craig. It's been a pleasure. Awesome.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Make sure to subscribe via your preferred podcast platform. And for more information on Encore, visit encoreservices.com.